Transition, the process of change from one condition to another.
We are now at a new crossroad where change is evident once again.
What does not serve us must transform us anew.
Returning to our original state of oneness and true nature of that which created who we truly are.
Confusion was the way of the past. Enlightenment is the way of the now and future, shedding away the layers of deceit.
We now bring you the transformation of the two who started as one. Our fearless planet never stands still.
Earth has been in a process of transition, and we are not exempt from this remarkable ongoing reality. Well, hello, and welcome to Transitions Radio Show's Real Talk with the Cummings. My name is Mark/Maritza.
And I'm Lena/nothing.
Lena/Lena.
But yeah, I just wanted to say this is going to be a really insightful show. We've got a tremendous guest from across the pond, and it's going to be very interesting.
Yes, very.
Sure.
So let's go ahead and start by reading his bio. And of course, he has to be anonymous. And I think most of us know why, because there's a group of individuals that do not want the real voices to come out, do not want the truth to come out, and don't want the narrative challenge. And I think that's very shameful, But anyway, today we have Not in Denial, also known as G. We will be referring to him as G. G is a 46-year-old married man with 2 daughters. He has been a mental health professional for more than 20 years. His interest in issues of sex and gender stems from his early life experiences. G was a sensitive child, and as a teenager, he felt alienated from the models of masculinity he saw around him. As a result, he often felt his life would have been easier if he had been born a girl. Becoming a father at 28 was the beginning of his journey towards discovering a positive sense of himself as a man.
Since 2010, G has been active in men's work, psychotherapeutic group for men. In men's work, they proceed from the understanding that there are archetypal masculine qualities which men need to reckon with if they are to avoid falling into harmful patterns of behavior. For instance, men need to know where they stand in relation to the warrior archetype in order to be able to manage their inherent propensity to aggression. And they also are very much focused on men's tendencies towards disengagement and disconnection.
Oh, welcome to the show, G.
Hello. It's good to be here.
We're so glad to have you here, and I believe your voice is very important. Your experience as a psychotherapist for over 20 years is going to be very helpful. And I want to say it's a shame that individuals like yourself that are willing to speak up have to be so careful because of those individuals out there that just want to destroy people's livelihood, and just not allow people to speak the truth.
Mm-hmm. Just to be clear, this is probably my fault. I've probably not been clear enough. I'm actually a social worker by background, so I don't work as a psychotherapist, but I've been involved as a participant in a lot of psychotherapeutic group work and individual psychotherapy as well.
Okay. So in that case, right now, before we went on, we were talking about the Center for Gender Psychology, the Evidence-Based Social Work Alliance group that you're part of. Did you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So there's it was a bit of a long and winding road that sort of led me to them, really. But there's one of the many groups that have sprung up in recent years around this sort of stuff. It's a group of, I think there's probably 15 or 20 of us. We're social workers with concerns about gender ideology. So we just had our first sort of face-to-face meeting actually last weekend, which was fantastic. A bunch of us, I think about 11 of us, got together in person. And there is a website, and people are coming from different points of view. I suppose the predominant point of view within the group is a sort of gender critical feminist point of view. I'm a little bit of an outlier, because I'm coming at this much more from the point of view of male psychology and an interest in men's issues. And I'm one of only 3 men within the group. And I think that that's really symptomatic of sort of why I've got so invested, I guess, in what's going on in this area. Because so much of the work that I have done over the years in terms of my own personal development has been about addressing this issue of why men have this tendency to be disconnected, and to look the other way, and to not engage with things which may be, when you stand back and take a look at it from a distance, it can sort of be a glaring issue that's staring you in the face.
And what
I
do you
think
think that is? What do you think that is that men tend to disengage that way?
So, I mean, I think there's probably lots of different reasons for it. I mean, I think, my take on sort of why men and women have, I mean, there's a sort of stereotypical profile of kind of how a man tends to behave and how a woman tends to behave. And I think to some extent that's based in biology, but it's also to do with the social role. And it's to do with how the socialization that we go through accentuates those qualities that we may have been born with. So I think probably men come into the world being slightly less relational to start with. And then I think that the way that we're socialized tends to accentuate that, so that we become, relatively, I don't want to say disabled is probably the wrong word, but compared to women, we develop in a way that we're not so adept with handling things that are emotionally challenging. So we tend to focus on, technical things, instrumental things, the world of objects. And we become very uncomfortable at sort of stepping into that domain of emotional difficulty and challenge, and feelings, strong feelings in particular. We often don't know what to do with strong feelings. I spent a long period in my life of just not really knowing what I was feeling, all the way through my 20s. I would just, I just find myself in these states of just kind of fight or freeze, because I didn't know what I was feeling. And a lot of my personal work has been about learning how to actually identify what I'm feeling, and give it a name, and be able to articulate it to myself and other people. I think because men sort of go into that place of panic almost a lot of the time when we're confronted with stuff that's emotionally challenging, it just becomes a lot easier to direct our attention elsewhere. And I've been really thinking about this in relation to particularly the ROGD stuff. I mean, I'm particularly sensitive to this, I think, because I've got 2 daughters. But there are lots and lots of other men out there who've got daughters, obviously. But you rarely see men really being all that concerned. I mean, obviously there are lots of men who are concerned, but in relation to the amount of women that are concerned, the proportions are, there's a significant sort of shortfall of men, and you'll often hear when when you sort of listen to stuff like that, the work that Angus Fox has done, for example, who you might know of. He's a part of GenSpect, and he's done work with parents of ROGD teenagers, and he'll say, that the men often just don't seem to be that bothered about it until literally the night before the top surgery is going to happen. And then they wake up and they're like, hang on, what the fuck is going on?
Right. And do you think that that's something that has been taught due to the socialization that men have been provided with? Or do you think it's something biological that, due to the flight or fight, due to the fact that men have typically been the one that have been the protector, the hunters, the way nature does things? In your opinion, do you think it's more socialization, environmental, or do you think it's something that's innate?
Well, like I say, I mean, I think it's a bit of both. I mean, I think, men are, and it's very difficult to unpick, isn't it? So for example, one of the findings that I've come across is that, men tend to get flooded a lot more easily than women. So which kind of fits with that idea of going into a fight or flight or freeze state. So when there's a lot of emotion in the atmosphere, men will have that experience more readily than women of just being flooded and just not being able to respond in any meaningful way. So they've got a lower threshold for that. But does that come from, is that a result of the fact that, a man is born with that, or is that a result of socialization? My suspicion is that there's, that it's a bit of both, that, there are inherent inborn differences between men and women. But I think we've developed a society where, because it's easier for everyone, isn't it? In a way, if we're not encouraged to explore the parts of ourselves that are difficult for us to explore, it makes our lives easier.
Yeah, and I think that's where this whole trans narrative comes in, that people don't want to face their traumas, their hurt, so it's easier to create a persona and then call it gender dysphoria and then proceed to just create a new person so that they don't
Mm.
have to deal with their emotions, their feelings. Um,
There's a number of things that I was interested in asking you, but one of the things that I just thought about right now was that men are born, little boys are born with like this, like, I don't know if it's a calling or a role to play as an individual, more so than as a team worker. And I
Mhm.
think that a lot of times that young boys are brought up to be focused on that individual goal, being the best player on their team, being the best at, because their dads always like emphasize being the best at everything. And I think like that when little girls are socialized, they're socialized to be a part of a group or to nurture things or to nurture their baby brother or their baby sister or to help around with chores around the house or anything that has to do with being a part of a team. And
Mm.
I think that a lot of times that in the lack of men, boys being able to work as a team with another person or a group of people, that they enter like this no man's land where they're kind of like a blank slate. They don't know how to respond to like emotional outbursts or things of that nature because it's like everybody's like focusing on them being so individual.
Mm.
I,
Mm.
I don't know, what do you think of that?
Well, it's risky, isn't it? I mean, if you're a young boy, if you show weakness, um, if you don't have an expectation that you're going to be supported by your peers. If you're lucky, then you will get that. But um, a lot of the time you'll get. And I'm not saying that it's easy for girls either. I know there's a lot of cruelty that goes on. Um, you know, but I'm sort of thinking particularly kind of pre-pubescence, I guess. Um, Thinking back to my own childhood, I'm fairly confident that there was more fellow feeling amongst the girls on the whole than there was amongst the boys. It was much more of a sort of a bear pit um, with the boys. Um, and yeah, I mean, it's just really hard to disentangle. I do think that um, just that the way that we kind of built our society, because it values that quality of sort of, like you say, that sort of that rugged individualism in boys and in men. Um, that we don't exercise those muscles of connecting in the way that women do. So
Yeah.
and so
Go ahead. Go
I
ahead.
guess that's where the men's work that I've been involved in is that's what it's really all about. It's about kind of helping guys to learn almost from the ground up, kind of how to be related, and how to sort of um, how to say what you need and what you're feeling clearly, and to be able to kind of receive a genuine response, instead of kind of going around in the world with these screens up the whole time, sort of waiting for the next assault.
I remember though when you first detransitioned, it was like, I think it was May of 2015, and how this kind of like this group of women from all across social media kind of came to you and just kind of,
Embrace me.
embraced you.
Mm.
And I thought to myself, I'm not at that place where I am thinking about detransitioning, but if I were to, I don't think that this is available for men at all, because the way the man's psyche is developed around other men is that once you like hand out that man card and you give it up and you put it on the counter and you say I don't want it, it's like it's almost like they don't want you back in their club. You know what I mean? Because
Mm.
you pretty much transgressed the most critical of the rules, which is don't be a woman. I mean,
Mm.
it's basically that,
Mm.
and so finding your way back to any kind of semblance of camaraderie with men that you grew up with or you knew or that knew you in the past before you transition is just not the same as if when you had detransition. They were
Mm.
willing to almost they welcomed you back.
And do
Yeah.
you think, G, that that's because men are taught not to feel? I think a lot of mothers are probably responsible, as well as fathers, for telling their little boys don't cry, hide your emotions.
Mm.
They're taught to act like warring games, to be physical, but never to show their emotions. And that's clearly evident when you see a young boy that is very feminine and possibly could end up being attracted to other men because of father wounds or molestation or whatever reason. So men just don't have that capability, or if they do, they hide it. It's well driven deep, deep, deep down, swept into a rug type of thing.
Mm.
And I think it's just harming
Yeah.
society in general. Not never mind this whole trans narrative that it's taken over the world. It's just people just have forgotten how to feel, and I think it's crossed over to women as well. Women are now being just as masculine, just as disconnected as men
Mm.
are.
Mm.
What are
Mm.
your thoughts on that?
So So go back a minute, Mark. Sorry, just I got distracted by the last thing that you said. Just go back to before you were talking about women and what they do.
Well, women tend to not allow their little boys to feel, in a sense, they like
Right.
man
Okay.
up,
Yeah.
they
Yeah. Yeah.
kind of do that kind of thing. And
Yeah.
or it could also go into the extreme where they over baby them, but not teaching them the skills that they require, and then men
Yeah.
being distant and not so. Boys nowadays really can lose for win because mothers don't provide them what they need and the fathers don't either, so they're being
Yeah.
educated by social media and television, and that's not doing a
Yeah.
great job.
Because I think the big problem we have is that men, fathers have not had fathering. They've not had positive fathering. So if you haven't had it yourself, how are you going to provide it to your son? Um, and I think what happens is that we see this pattern. That um, the father withdraws at a certain point. Um, you know, the father either the father is always absent. Either he's absent physically from the home because he's off working the whole time, and work is a retreat for a lot of men. It's a way of evading that emotional intimacy. Um, but it's also something that they've been taught that that's what they should be doing. That's their role, is to be the provider. So they're out there working every hour that there is. Um, you know, or that the man may be physically present in the home, but he's not emotionally present, or he may be emotionally present up to a certain point, which was my experience with my dad. Um, that he was, I would say, he was very present when we were small children, but certainly when I hit adolescence, I don't think he knew what to do. I think it probably triggered a lot of unresolved stuff from his own past, and he found it very difficult to handle. And a distance, I experienced it as, where's my dad gone? It was like he withdrew from me. Possibly he experienced it as me withdrawing from him. Um, I don't know, because I've not had the opportunity to have that conversation with him, because it's hard for him to have those kind of conversations. Um, but I think what happens is that when the father is not playing an active role, then the mother then has to sort of try and compensate for that. So then, instead of having two, because you'll often find a lot of young men will be very angry with their mothers, and they'll say, there's too much mother in my life. She's controlling. She's trying to sort of take over and tell me what to do and so on. Why didn't she leave me alone? It's not that there's too much mother, but there's too little father, and so the mothers become frantic on some level, because they're overreaching themselves. Um, and I think that's a dynamic actually that we're seeing at the moment in the trans stuff. I think that the voice of feminists and women has been so important in actually making this an issue that people are now talking about. But I think you'll often see the voices of women in this debate getting characterized as, well, they're hysterical, they're shrill, they're all of this kind of stuff, that these stereotypes that have always been heaped on women. But the reason why women are sort of finding themselves becoming so driven to express themselves in that way is because the men are not stepping up, and the men are not taking their role in this. They're looking the other way. They're emotionally absent. And I think that's such a. I'd like to say it's such a shame, but it's not unexpected, because it's a dynamic that we see everywhere.
That's very true. I mean, it's from the beginning of time. It's always been that way, and now more so than ever. Ever since, I believe, ever since women have gone into the workplace, And then it's like now the child has less of either parent because now the mother's working and the father's working, kids being raised by the school or by their television, and all sorts of things are being programmed in there, and we're seeing things spiral for the worse.
I think also that the perception of the role of what men serve in a family has really been minimized as a glorified paycheck in many respects. The shows of the 50s, like Ozzie and Harriet or Leave It to Beaver, had, a wise father who would impart wisdom to their children, was loving towards his wife, worked but was responsible. And it seems like as the years have gone by, the decades now, we see men being portrayed as bumbling fools, disillusioned at best,
Mm-hmm.
with goals that don't relate to anything having to do with their family, just career. Glorified bachelors living a married life, uh, and away from their families at any given moment, as long as they can, make the money, the wife is happy. And it's like this kind of like this compromise that's been made for the male, the father, to be the provider, and that
Mm.
the wife and the spouse will be everything else. The nurturer
Yes.
will be the
Yeah.
the cheerleader, will be the drill instructor, will be the coach, will be the cook, everything else. But the guy, all he has to do is
Yeah.
provide the paycheck.
Yeah.
You know,
And it's really sad because you'll actually see so many men who have taken this idea in completely. Um, I know so many men who you know they are out there. They're absolutely sacrificing their health, um, and their relationships with their kids and all kinds of other things because they want to be bringing home the money. Um, and in their minds, because they've received this narrative that this is what men do. So, in their minds, they're sort of imagining that they're going to receive gratitude as a result of this. But actually, from the point of view of the family, from the point of view of the wife, maybe not so much the wife, it all depends, but certainly from the perspective of the kids, what they see as an absence. And then that absence gets filled with all kinds of negative projections. And
Yeah, very
and
true.
and the father ends up being, on a certain level, ends up being hated. And you'll see these guys whose relationships break down in midlife, and they're out living on their own in a little flat somewhere, away from their family, and they're bitter because they can't understand what went wrong.
Yeah, I see the roles of both men and women breaking down and being disillusioned. And I think that's why we're having this massive gender identity crisis because neither male nor female are actually leading life in the roles that they were meant to live. And call me old fashioned, but I think back in the day everybody knew what they had to do. They played their part right, and the family was the core focus for both, and they somehow managed to have happier lives than we do now. And I think
Mm,
this is why you have men who feel they're not fulfilled, so they think, well, I should be a woman because they're
mm,
sensitive and they don't fit in the typical role. And then you have the women that just don't have that nurturing capacity because they haven't hasn't been taught in a while, and they haven't had those figures, role models to look at. So
mm,
everything's
mm,
like turned upside down. I'm just seeing society just falling apart, and families breaking apart, and gender. I mean, no one can even identify or say what a woman actually is.
mm,
That's kind of scary when it should be as
mm,
easy as pie to answer
mm,
that.
mm.
What are your thoughts on what I just said?
Um, yeah, I mean, I don't know really. I mean, I wasn't alive 50 years ago, so it's kind of hard for me to sort of compare and contrast. I mean, in some ways, I think there's some hopeful signs. So I was at a performance yesterday with it's like a sort of a drama class that my younger daughter goes to, and they did a performance, and there were some of the older students, and in amongst them were some boys, sort of 18, 19-year-old kids, and not very many of them. Again, vastly outnumbered by the girls and young women. But these boys were just fantastic, and I was tearing up because they were so expressive in the way they presented themselves. And I don't think, because I sort of vaguely know some of them through my older daughter, I don't think that they are kids who are seeing themselves as trans or not as men. But they seem to be able to, to sort of dance and sing and portray themselves in a really sort of, in a way that I think might have been harder when I was their age, which would be about 30 years ago now. So I sort of feel like there is, in amongst everything that's going on, there are spaces opening up where young men can, they have got other models that they can follow if they're able to find a space where they can do that. And I guess that's always been the case, hasn't it, in sort of performance and the performing arts and all of that.
Gee, can you take us back to like 1980, 82 when you were a kid? What kind of kid were you? How was your relationship with your parents? Were you potentially one of those gender questioning youths of today back then?
Yeah, I mean, I think I could very easily have been. So I was your classic sort of bookworm kind of, sort of nerdy kind of character. And I got picked on quite a lot when I was in primary school because I wasn't into sport and I was, I was kind of easily set off. So, the slightly more aggressive kids knew that, they could trigger me quite easily. So then obviously you get picked on. And then I guess when puberty sort of hit, so again, I was probably a bit of a late developer. And I just didn't have a lot of confidence at all. And I mean, I don't think I've ever sort of, I don't think I've ever, it's complicated. And I'm sort of wondering how much I should share here, but I had relationships with girls that were just really difficult because I wasn't confident in myself, and my sexuality was sort of alien to me. So the sex side of those early relationships just didn't go well at all. And as a result of that, I found myself wondering, well, am I really gay? And I just haven't figured it out. And I certainly had the idea, if I'd been a girl, life would have been so much easier. I often had that fantasy when I was a teenager. And of course, at the time, it was just a fantasy. There wasn't, I mean, I was sort of aware of, I was really interested in kind of alternative culture. So I was kind of aware that, there were people that, that were transsexuals or people who did bodily modifications and stuff like that. But it was still very much, it wasn't something that you could imagine sort of running away to the big city and then you could live that life. But the idea that you could live that life within your little suburban town was just completely alien. And that seems to be the difference now, that it's kids obviously are getting the message that actually, as long as I um, as long as I follow certain rules, I can, because it's all still very rule based, isn't it? You don't get to be gender non-conforming in a way that doesn't conform to other people's expectations. You can be in the box marked, um, heterosexual, straight, cisgender in inverted commas, or you can be the trans kid. That seems to be, or you can be perhaps non-binary, but they're all, in their way, they're all still quite constricted little boxes. But I can see the appeal um, that must be there for quite a lot of young people.
Well, I think that the typical developmental stages that we go through from infancy all the way to teenagehood and then adulthood has been, what's the word, has been like stopped because now people don't have to work through their challenges and deal with the ramifications. It's like, okay, you can be whatever you want to be.
Mm-hmm.
Prior, like when you were growing up, you knew that if that it was just a fantasy, you couldn't do what you wanted, and you learned to be that man. You learned to navigate life that allowed
Mm.
you to get married, have your children, and then realize, wow, I'm glad I didn't do the other. You work through all those little quirks and problems.
Mm.
Nowadays, people are facilitated too easy. Oh, it doesn't work for you. Doesn't matter here. You can be a woman if you were born a
Yeah,
man, or
yeah,
vice versa. And I
yeah,
think it's
yeah.
taken away from people learning how to develop their psyche, people learning how to cope, how to deal with life's problems.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, for sure. Because you're
It's
right. I mean, it's work, isn't it? It's, the work
Yeah,
of sort of becoming yourself is, that's a lifetime's work. Um, you know, and I think, yeah, it's really scary that, a child basically, um, is being asked to, um, being expected to be able to say, I am, my identity is this, um, and I mean, all the issues around sort of consent are just so, um, to me, it's just blindingly obvious. How can any child consent to any of, certainly the surgical and the medical stuff? I mean, it's a real stretch for me to imagine that even an 18-year-old can consent to that stuff. Um, just because I know how incredibly, you know, when I was 18, my how jumbled up my internal world was at that age. Um,
it's
yeah, go on.
it's hard to be a teenager. People don't realize, they forget, but every teenager in the world goes through struggles, goes through identity crisis. Everything is growing in your body, hormones are all over the place. They're going from being a young adult to an adult, and it's a difficult time. I don't know what's happened all of a sudden that people think that it's a license to destroy their bodies, to undergo medicalization, take harmful chemicals. I
Yeah,
mean,
I think it's quite the oxymoron to think that a child, as it comes out of the womb, the child is still not fully developed. Even that cranial part where the little soft spot doesn't close till, a year or whatever into just the baby walking or, just crawling around and stuff like that later in life. But we're expected to think that at 2, someone's gender identity was already cemented inside and that it
mm,
was already a deeply held understanding and truth that they alone knew and that nobody else, would ever know. And I just think that as a child grows and as that child matures and they're still not fully developed as a human being, we're still not fully developed until 25, 30 years into life
yeah,
basically. So you're handing children this license to do whatever they want, to
Yeah.
sterilize themselves if they feel like it, because they feel this way. When we know that 85-90% of kids will, after they experience puberty, will desist from thinking like that, and
Yeah.
and they'll just settle into whatever role in society that they're intended to settle into.
And G, let me ask you your opinion regarding development. I'm sure with your profession that you've studied child development, adult development. Do you think that even adults, and I believe that there's a lot of adults that are still stuck in their terrible twos, they're still having worked
Mhm.
through a lot of the traumas, and they're still behaving like they're a young a young child and with an adult body. Do you think that even that these individuals can still make these decisions of totally altering their body and altering their life based on trauma that they had growing up?
Yeah. 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 I mean, that's a whole other question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because there's so much comorbidity. Um, I mean, certainly in terms of, something that I've noticed. A lot of my work is in sort of crisis care. So I work in mental health. I work with adults and children, um, and yeah, there's in some individuals, um, you can see the same mechanisms occurring, which are there in somebody who gets a label of personality disorder, for example. Um, you can sort of see how they're enacting their trauma in certain ways, and the idea is that I'm sure you know all about this, the idea is that um, the, the person is not equipped to actually experience the trauma that they went through. So they act it out and they externalize it. Um, and I think, yeah, when you get into sort of talking about surgeries, particularly sort of genital surgeries or, um, you know, surgeries on your reproductive organs. I mean, again, you don't have to be, it's not a massive leap of the imagination to see how if you've undergone sexual trauma, particularly, how that, again, that could be a very attractive on an unconscious level. That could be a very attractive kind of thing to do. Um, I think, that experience of being sort of alienated from your own body. I mean, there's like huge crossover with anorexia, isn't there? Um,
Yes.
Certainly in terms of, I mean, there was a fantastic graph. I don't know if you saw this, but someone circulated a graph on Twitter recently that sort of showed I think it was the searches for anorexia over a 10-year period. It showed sort of the proportion of searches for anorexia versus the proportion of searches for transgender, and you could sort of saw them crossing over midway through the 2010s. Um, and you can see how the dynamics could potentially be very similar in any individual. Um, that whole sort of thing of wanting to reject your developing body, wanting to kind of enact violence upon your body, which has possibly been the place where violence has been enacted upon you. Um, so um, engaging in those behaviors that mean that you can disassociate yourself completely from your sexuality because you've destroyed it, either by starving yourself to the point that um, your periods stop and your sexual function, your sexual interest disappears, or by going for the hormones or the surgeries, which have the same effect.
Exactly. And what's really mind blowing is that these so called professionals are facilitating these procedures, whether it's surgery or handing out of hormones and blockers, and not realizing the damage that these things do and that it doesn't get to the root of the problem.
Mm.
And I think the problem is really deeply rooted in trauma, whatever trauma that is. Could be, like you said, sexual molestation, father mother wound, um, sibling rivalry, anything. I
mm,
mean, anything
mm,
could
mm.
actually create, especially in the mind of a child, that something happens to us at a young age. It's like forever instilled in our psyche, and there's a tear in our psyche that we can never iron out, and we go through life trying to numb ourselves, whether drug, alcohol,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
food, this gender dysphoria thing. It's like, all to me, what gender dysphoria is a dislike of who you are. And why do you dislike who you are? I mean, why
Mm,
do people pick on gender? Well, there,
mm,
that's the only thing that they could actually really change. So they think, well, if I was born a girl, like you said earlier, that life would be better. And why
mm,
do we pick gender to be our cure all, when in actuality it doesn't cure
mm.
everything? And I found that the hard way, and I'm sure a lot of the detransitioners found out the hard way. And many people who don't identify as detransitioners, just won't talk about it, found out in the long run that this transition thing wasn't at all what they thought it would be.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think, that one of the great shames in this whole situation is that, the thing that I've learned um, from my training and just the you know my experience over sort of 20 years of working in mental health is that the role of adults um, is to help children and young people and even older people to actually think about what they're experiencing. You know, it's because the child is not able to do that thinking, so they need they haven't reached the developmental level yet that they're able to do that. So our role as adults is to be able to help them think. And actually that's this is where I'm not going to be coming down just so hard just on men. I think this applies to all adults. I think the adults have just simply failed. you know the adults have just abdicated that responsibility to help the children think, um, which is, I mean, again, is it extraordinary, or is it actually just what we might expect? Um, because it's another kind of denial, isn't it? It's another kind of um, refusal to accept things that are difficult. And that's kind of what we do in society.
I think that the importance of the development of a young male psyche from the ages of birth to 5 years old is unbelievably um, critical
Mm,
in their development, in their understanding of who they are as a person and what they are as a sex. And I think that anytime any type of um, an obstacle that leads to any feeling of disillusionment is introduced to that child is much more dangerous for that male child to absorb, because I mean, girls are given the opportunity to be tomboys.
mm,
Boys are not given the opportunity to be princess
mhm,
fairy girls, you know what I mean, fairy boys or
mm,
anything, because society doesn't have those allowances for males as it does for females. A girl in jeans and a t-shirt climbing trees is no big deal for society, but a little boy in a tiara and a tutu and stuff, well, that's a different story.
mm,
But I think that it doesn't matter whether there's it's a late transitioning transsexual person, a person who's a homosexual and transitions because they decided that they're disillusioned with being a male because they can't attract the kinds of relationships that they want to attract, and they feel like a pariah.
mm,
Like, our friend Shapeshifter has said, it's like, I felt like what she said, he said something about how he felt as if uh, there was, they're at the bottom of the social pecking order of male, of being male,
Mm,
because
mm,
if you're a soft male, if you're a very effeminate male, especially in the gay community, you're looked at as the bottom of the barrel. And
mm,
I think also as a late transitioners, I know I could speak for this myself because as a person who transitioned back in 2013, um, there's a great deal of disillusionment that contributed to my transitioning. I felt like I failed as a husband and as a father and as being a male role model of
mm,
feeling minimized in many ways, demasculinized in many instances in my life from the time I was a child to even as a husband to my wife and children and stuff like that. So that was a huge. I mean, I think disillusionment is massive compared to reasons that women choose to transition, which are different. You know,
mm.
what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I mean that's really interesting. And I think probably I don't know enough people who've gone through this process. I'm really interested in getting to know um, more people so that I can understand it better. Um, that that sort of sense of failure that you're getting at, which I think is, I'd say that that's a pretty common male experience, at least from my sort of my experience of sitting with groups of men. Um, we tend to have a bit of a joke. Is it actually that everybody should, all men should be in a men's group, or is it that actually we're the self-selecting few? We're the ones that really need it because we're more fucked up than the rest of them. But I really don't think that that's true. I think that a lot of men are going through life with a sense of um, it's that kind of brittleness, isn't it? You know, I've got to kind of keep up this shell personality because my own sense of failure is such I can't. My own sense of vulnerability is such that I can't. Um, if I kind of allow that in, I'm going to crumble.
And I think that one of the things that you mentioned is that when you had your first daughter, you and your wife and stuff, and the sense of joy, the sense of mission and purpose that you had kind of like made those feelings that you had about yourself and your gender kind of go away. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely the beginning of me sort of. Um, I mean, one of the things my wife will talk about is that when she met me, I had a very feminine or feminized kind of presentation. Um, you know, I she I think a lot of people used to assume that I was gay because I had that. I was feminine in the way that I looked and acted, um, and I think I had almost a revulsion when I was younger to those kind of not stereotypically, but those actual male features, like sort of the the body hair and the all that kind of stuff. Um, and and then I think the experience of sort of becoming a father. Um, it's interesting because I've always said to people it's like um, it connects you with the sort of the flow of humanity in a way that I don't think when you're a childless person, um, it's very easy to kind of to feel disconnected or to feel like you're not really a member of the human race. Um, when you have kids, suddenly you're experiencing all of these kind of archetypal experiences, and you're being put into these archetypal roles, um, which you then have to respond to in one way or another. And suddenly, just so much stuff just started to make sense. I think at that point, um, I couldn't. I mean, I could understand my dad, for example, now in a way that I never could previously, because through having been in that role myself. Um, so so yeah, it was like, um, it was, yeah. I mean, it's funny because I would say it's probably only been the last kind of 6 or 7 years maybe that I've really felt like I can call myself a man properly. Um, you would have seen me, when we checked in earlier on. I've got this big beard at the moment. I would never have had a beard like that up until, you know, I think probably now is the first point in my life where I feel like I can wear a beard like that and actually own it and not feel like a fraud.
It's interesting. So, why do you think having children got you connected to your manhood? Because I know a lot of trans women that have children and they
Mm.
still transition and they didn't get
Yeah,
connected to their manhood. So there's got to be, I think there's got to be something different for everyone, something that connects that neurological system in alignment to be connected fully to the person that you are and the roles that you've been given to
yeah,
in life.
yeah, 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 yeah. Of course, I don't know, and obviously, I can't speak for anyone else, and it is interesting, Lina, that you've. It sounds like you've gone through that experience, and that wasn't the outcome for you.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that was one of the hopes that I had, was because I was raised in a very deeply religious family, conservative Christian, and the conforming to those social norms that were expected, the social roles that were expected to be, that I was assigned and everything, those were things that were mandatory, not at all
Mm,
an option, but it was something that I had to conform to. And I remember just saying, "Okay, God, because we're both Christians now, and we were both just I was at the place in my life back then where I was like, okay, God, if this is what you want for me, let it happen, and then maybe these feelings will just dissipate,
mm,
as they
mm,
did for you, when you had your first daughter and everything, and now you have two daughters, which is amazing. Um, and when I had my first, when I had we had our first child, had a boy, and then had a girl, and then had a few more, and I
mhm,
was just like, okay, well, um, this is life. This is where I'm at. This is the place that God has for me. So I'm just gonna do my best, and hopefully these feelings and these thoughts can just kind of work their way through my psyche and out somehow or another. And I don't know, but at the age of 41, I hit a wall in my psyche that just wouldn't allow me to go any further without dealing with these issues of my gender. And
mm,
then, when you're told by a psychologist, by a therapist, oh, you're classically presenting with everything that has to do with gender dysphoria. Why didn't you come in sooner? And they're
mm,
just like totally just egging you on and telling
mm,
you the things you want to hear.
mm,
You believe the narrative. You believe that, yes, I was born in the wrong body. Yes, I was never intended to be a man. Yes, I was never intended to have children or be a husband or any of that stuff. I'm not a good father. All of
mm,
those
mhm,
things, and then it just kind of like washes over you like a tidal wave,
mm,
where you feel like, oh, that's what's been wrong this whole time, is that I'm really not supposed to be a guy,
mm,
and
mm,
those types of feelings just kind of like overwork everything else about you. Anything other than transition now becomes the complete focus. And my hope was that that wouldn't be the case, but in my case, that's what happened.
mm. But it sounds like you didn't get a kind of therapy that would have been helpful to you at that point.
Well, at that point, the therapy that was being offered was simply that, and I knew that I could go to a Christian therapist and I could talk to them, uh, which which we did. We had marital counseling and we spoke to a Christian therapist, but they were so unfamiliar with what I was dealing with that they felt incapable of offering me any advice or any
Mm,
kind of,
mm, mm,
the last thing that I had heard was, initially, my wife and I at the time had gone together as marriage counseling, and we went several sessions, and then after a time, she realized that, these sessions weren't really helping her. So she found a therapist that she could deal with about what she was going through. I continued with this Christian therapist. And the last thing he told me was, you know, wherever you might find yourself on the fence of life, either, transitioning to become a woman or continuing your life, just be a good dad while you're at home. Just be a good husband while you're at the house.
mm.
And, I don't think that this has anything to do with your salvation, And so he basically gave me the green light to do and to be and everything.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah,
yeah, I
yeah,
didn't get the help that I probably should have
yeah.
gotten.
In your opinion, and the profession that you're in, dealing with the things that you deal with, do you believe that these gender specialists should be allowed to do what they're doing, seeing that they're not equipped to deal with all these cluster B um, personality types and all
Mm.
these other diagnoses that I see that are the center of this gender dysphoria? Do you believe that these individuals, I mean, and I don't know what could be done now, should either be better educated to deal with trans, quote unquote, gender or transsexual people instead of just handing them out letters to get hormones and
Mm,
surgeries, making them actually work with their clients based on the real issues?
mm. Yeah,
What do you,
absolutely. But I guess one thing I would say is that it's a bit like earlier on we were talking about, if your father hasn't been fathered himself, how is he going to father properly? Um, and I think, I mean, I can't speak too much to the situation in other parts of the world because I don't understand it very well. But I work within the NHS in the UK, um, and um, my understanding of the way that gender services have been working in the UK is that you've had, because the referral rates have just shot up so much, that you've got quite a lot of um, relatively inexperienced clinicians working in overstretched services, um, and they're not getting the level of supervision and support that they need in order to then provide that to the young people that are coming to see them. Um, because I think it's got to go through all different levels of the organisation. Um, and I've seen it so many times in working in mental health services here in the UK. Like I say, I don't know what they're like where you are, but there'll be a level of madness actually at the top of the organisation, um, a level of sort of uncontainedness, which then filters all the way down through the organization so that nobody feels safe, nobody feels properly parented, and therefore the people at the ground level, the clients coming into the service are not getting what they need because the organization is just dysfunctional basically from top to bottom. And that's my sense of what GIDS has been like. Um, I assume you know about GIDS, the Tavistock Clinic.
Yes, yes. Yeah, and we have a whole bunch of clinics that have opened up here. So, needless to say, we have a major problem here in the United States with this. And it's being promoted by the top, which the government is like giving the green light. And they don't really understand it. They really don't. They're just trying to be PC. And, you've got tons of loud keyboard warriors that are pushing the narrative, and they know what buttons to push. There's a lot of money backing this up, and my fear is that the voices that need to be heard aren't being heard, and they really haven't studied this to the great degree that needs to be studied to
Yeah, yeah,
understand
yeah,
what
for
this is
sure.
actually all about, because no
Mm,
one, in my opinion, and what I've seen through the years, is born wrong. We
mm,
have psychological issues stemming from all sorts of different places, childhood trauma, later on trauma in life, whatever it is. But there is no objective finding, no objective test to
mm,
tell someone without a shadow of a doubt you're born wrong.
And that's
yeah,
where we kind of like separate in opinion, because I can't say with utter certainty, as you have just stated
Right.
now, that there is no way that anything could happen in utero that would cause any kind of incongruency with gender. I just don't think that we know enough about humans and their development to be able to make such assertions and statements and
mm,
such just they're just finalities as to like this is just the way it is and this is how things are. I really do think that much more compassion needs to be uh, given to this issue, and the fact that it's even a political issue is really sad. And for me, because personally, I don't appreciate being a part of any of the political argument about it at all. I don't like being, in this forum of gender critical ideology or anything like that, because I think that what has been a very deeply personal issue has now been opened into like a come one, come all. If you have any kind of cluster B type personality disorder, you're welcome under the trans umbrella and you're trans and you need to take hormones and transition. I
mm,
personally think that it's very, very few people, if any, that should ever do anything like this at all, because this is not a solution for most people.
yeah,
99.9% of people are not going to be helped by this, and we
mm,
see it with the rising numbers of almost 35,000 in the already trans.
Let me explain the reason I'm so concrete about this, because I am a medical professional and I know how the body operates, and there's a very few individuals that are intersex, that but even in intersexuality there is no question about biology. No matter what happens in the womb, there are hormonal bathing that take place, but that doesn't mean that a person is born in the wrong body. Now, I truly believe that it's more psychological than anything else, and upbringing and dealing with issues. And I have the most empathy for people because I've been through it myself.
mm,
And I love you, as a human being, and I know what you go through, and I know what you've lost to do this. But you know, we have to be able to be real. We have to be able to say things the way things are, because that's the only way we're going to help people. Tiptoeing through eggshells and letting people believe that it's okay, it's only harming people further. I mean, how many families have been destroyed? How many people's health have been destroyed by this? And I think, in my opinion, it's time to come out with the truth, and the professionals need to speak out.
mm,
What is
mm.
your opinion on this, G?
Well, I don't think it's ever helpful to tell people or to lead people to believe that they are born in the wrong body. Um, I think what we should be aiming for in general is, it's what one can accept that one has a dissonance with one's body, um, and um, one hasn't one finds it difficult to live in one's body. Um, but that doesn't mean that you're in the wrong body, any more than saying, well, okay, I'm not too happy about living in the 21st century. I'd rather have been born in the 15th. That's kind of, that's how I imagine myself. You are where you are. There is no right or wrong. Things are just what they are. And I think if you're somebody who finds it so agonizing to live in the kind of body that you have, after a sufficient period of thought and reflection and speaking to professionals and so forth, and you make the decision that you want to go ahead and have the surgeries and the hormones, that's maybe that's your journey. Maybe that's what's going to turn out to be the right path for you. But I don't think that necessarily involves. I don't think you have to have that idea that I'm in the wrong body, or that it's possible to be in the wrong body. I think it's applying some sort of, almost like applying an ethical standard to something that just where it doesn't apply. It's like a category error. The reality is just reality, and it's up to us what we do with it. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Oh, definitely, for sure, total sense. And it's like, I know how difficult it is for a lot of people. As you were mentioning earlier in the show, that we tend to like not want to face certain things in life because it's too painful. As children, we create our imaginary friends. As children, we create the reality that we want, and how to deal with things. But hopefully, as we mature into adulthood, we learn to integrate reality into life, and we learn to like not have that imaginary friend, or not have that crutch that's going to help you live life. Unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, not every adult actualizes their life and goes through all those stages of development as they need to, and they get stuck in certain levels. And I have all the empathy in the world for that. I mean, I know that as an occupational therapist, I study psychology very well. And in myself, seeing my whole trauma-based life and where it has led me. I'm not completely cured. There's a lot of things that I still have to work through, but I'm able to see things, and I'm able to talk about things and express my emotions, my feelings, my needs, and understand things a certain way. But I know that not everybody's there, and it takes people sometimes a whole lifetime to be able to do that. My hopes is to be able to help other people see that, and so that they don't have to live in that constant pain. Because I've known a lot of trans people, and they've done all the surgeries and they've done everything, and they're still not happy, which leads me to believe that this gender thing is not what's going to bring you happiness. You have to work through the deeper issues. And I know that's painful. That's not easy for everyone.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think, because we were watching a YouTube video just the other day, it was the Professor Sam Vashton, I think his name was, and he was talking about narcissistic personality disorder and transsexuality, and the correlation to the fact that that seems to be a very prominent feature in the lives of many transsexuals. Their personalities do suffer from this type of cluster B. What do you have you seen any evidence to that? And does that like you were talking about anorexia nervosa and gender dysphoria, and how it overlapped in the 2010s, both of these have a high degree of narcissism involved, right?
This is the person.
Sam Valkinen?
Yes.
Sam Valkinen. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that what I see is that there seems to be that control seems to be a very big part of it, and I guess that's where I see the similarities between people who might get a personality disorder diagnosis and people who take on a trans identity. again, this would only apply to a subset of people that I've encountered through work. But if you have the kind of personality that you are very interested in getting other people to, I'm not saying even to do what you want necessarily, but just to kind of have an impact on the people around you. To not let other people feel too comfortable around you, then taking on a trans identity and signing up to the trans ideology seems like a very good way of doing that. If you can have some set of pronouns that obviously don't match the way that you look, then that in itself is exerting a degree of control over the people around you, and just kind of putting a stick into the works, and destabilizing things in a way that I think, to me, is very reminiscent of the way a lot of people with personality disorders operate. And I'm not wanting to sort of to stigmatize anybody for that. It's as we know, it's to do with the sort of failure of mentalization and being able to work things through internally, so things have to be worked through externally. But there definitely seems to be a dovetailing there, at least in a number of the people that I've encountered professionally.
Definitely. So you had mentioned something. Your exploration towards a more positive sense of self leads to what conclusion? And I wrote that as a question, and I'm trying to like.
It led to what?
It led to what conclusion?
Do you mean for me personally?
Yes.
Yeah.
Gosh, well, I wouldn't say that I'm anywhere near having reached a conclusion yet.
Or
I mean, what I would say is that I'm solid in my sense of myself as a man now. And I suppose you could question, well, what does that mean? I guess I feel like I accept my limitations. I accept that I've got physical limitations and physical advantages as well. And I've got psychological, my psychology is a certain way. And that's, as we were talking about earlier on, it's hard to disentangle, is that coming from the way I was born? Is it to do with the society I've grown up in? But by the time you get to 46 years old, this stuff is hardwired in your brain, whether it's socialization or not. So I kind of experience myself as part of the mainstream of human maleness. I don't feel like I'm an outlier, which is an interesting thing to say, because in some ways I am an outlier, So I guess my sense of what a man can be has expanded. Whereas, I think I probably had a very narrow view of what men were. And actually now I think that it's quite possible to actually be quite an unconventional man, and to yet still be within the mainstream of whatever maleness is.
and I believe that right there, the the way people think what they believe a man should be is what gets, or a woman should be, is what gets us into trouble, because we've been told, I know with me from a very young age, I was always ridiculed, even by my own mother, saying that I
Mm.
wasn't feminine enough, that I wasn't womanly enough that I need to walk a
Yeah.
certain way. And you see the same thing being told to men. So when you have neurodivergence, which I believe a very large percentage of trans people are neurodivergent, meaning they have
Mm,
some
mm,
form of autism or the Asperger's spectrum, we take things literally. And in taking
yeah.
things literally, then we have to, okay, well, this is how I'm not this way, so I must be this way. And then we put all our efforts into trying to change who we are. And I think that's where the gender dysphoria comes from.
Mm,
Because
mm,
the gender match in our brain, the way we think we should be, doesn't match the way that we are. So therefore, we must be something else.
mm,
So I think it's important for people to make peace with who they are, to understand I am different. Like I know I'm a woman, and this is what a woman looks like for me because of all the
mm,
years of
mm,
taking hormones, and I'll never be able to be a man. Every cell in my body, and if they were men and women have particular cells that are, whether we like it or not, that are male and female, and that's the way it is. From our
mm,
DNA to our chromosomes, you name it. Even medication, if I were to take the dose of a man, it would kill me,
mm,
because my
mm,
body
mm,
is not male. And it's taken me a long time, 60 transitions,
mm,
to back and forth and battling and trying to understand who I am. And I think the only way to find true happiness is to make peace with yourself, to understand, okay, this is who I am, this is what I've become, this is what I've done to myself. I can't go
mm,
back to being the other anymore because it doesn't work.
mm.
Psychologically, my brain from all the years of using androgen has changed the way that I move, the way that I talk. And as it
Yeah.
as it was, I was very masculine from the very beginning. So doing what I did pretty much kind of blew up that bridge going back to womanhood.
Mm,
Although I know I'm a woman, I'll always be a woman. I was born a baby girl and I will die a woman. And
mhm,
and I think that peace that I've made with myself is very helpful. And I'm hoping that I'm able to like share that with others and other people are able to understand that you can't be anything other than you are. You could express
mm,
all any way you want. Try to not medicalize yourself because it will hurt you. I've
mm,
taken years off my life. I know from what I've done to myself,
mm,
and I'll
mm,
have to live with that or not live with that when I die. But I just hope that people could understand. You know.
mm, mm, mm. Yeah, 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 for sure.
No, I mean, I appreciate. I've been on this journey with my spouse for almost what we're going to go on
8 years.
8 years now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's been a journey for sure. Um, I had only transitioned a year in, and I met you, and the gender critical questioning started after that point, and it hasn't stopped ever since. And
Mm,
when I first met Mark, it was like, well, Mark was a man's man. Mark was the trans guy that so many trans guys wanted to emulate because he was so like in owning it in the sense, has so many people that in the last 10, 15, almost 20 years that have really looked up to this individual as being a source of inspiration for them transitioning.
mm,
And to hear you say, I'm a woman, I will always be a woman, I will die a woman, I was born a baby girl. I mean, this is what Mark said, Maritza said back in 2015 when the Rad Femmes came alongside and stuff and were really embracing you.
mm,
And I just felt like so like on the outside of everything because I'm like, okay, this is confusing because I was with a woman when I was married back when, and I left and I was dealing with my gender dysphoria, and I thought that I was going to be able to find a person who was kind of like in a similar mindset as I was, that we could just go in, live the rest of our life and just exist and be and do. But then we got together and we married, and it's been like sometimes it's been like chalk bracing, like on a chalkboard, fingernails on a chalkboard. I love you. I love everything about you. I love the person that you are. it's just so hard sometimes to hear that, because I'm just like,
Because we're in two different
what did I
places.
do? Why did I do what I did? If I was just, because I don't see Mark Maritza as a woman necessarily, because that's not what was introduced to me, and that's not the person that I
Mm,
get to see, as a person, and dealing, it's confusing to me,
mm,
honestly.
mm.
And I appreciate where you're at. I appreciate where you're at. I mean, it is what it is. I
Mm.
mean,
It's taken
I
me
don't want to.
years. It's taken me years. What do you
It's just hard.
what is your observation, and what is your, your, what's the word I'm looking for, advice, as far as, and I'm sure that there are other people that are in different levels of where they're at with their life journey, because I don't even want to say with their trans journey, because everybody's in a journey.
Mm.
um, what what can you say to what you just heard? um,
I mean, I guess, the first thing that I want to say is that I think it's actually brilliant that the two of you are able to actually have this discussion in real time without sort of feeling that you have to have a agreed position or a fully worked out answer, And like I was saying when we were chatting earlier on, I think there are things in this moment that strike me as really positive. Um, and one of those things is just the way that people are having conversations, which we should have been having a long time ago. These all of these conversations about sex and gender, you know, um, they have been going on in the culture for um, a good long time. Um, but they've maybe they sort of peaked in the 1970s, um, and then sort of died away a bit, and then the sort of trans thing has kind of brought it all out to the forefront again, and you're now seeing um, conversations between, like, for example, the rad femmes and people like me who've been involved in the men's movement, if you want to call it that, and we're finding that we've got things in common in the way that we think, and also points of difference. But there's just some fascinating conversations going on at the moment, and you know, it's great to see, that you're sort of doing that in real time, and I mean, I certainly don't feel like I can offer any advice really. Um, I think this is a process of learning for me. Um, you know, um, I guess what one of the things that I want, that what you know one of the things that I'd like people to know is that there are spaces available for men who want to work on this stuff. Because I think I get the sense that actually that's not very well known. I mean, I was really lucky. I had a colleague probably about 15 years ago now who was really involved in men's work. And he just used to talk about it in the office. And that was how I found out about it. And then I kind of got into going to workshops and groups and so forth. And I think there's such a need for it amongst men. And it's there if you look for it. And I guess one of the things that I'm interested in, this is sort of really what I'm interested in at the moment, is actually how can we invite possibly detransitioners or trans people who are questioning, not necessarily questioning whether they want to detransition or not, but just wondering what it's all about, and maybe want to do a bit of thinking around issues of masculinity. How can we welcome those people into these kind of spaces? Because I just feel like there's such a wealth of knowledge and wisdom amongst the people that I work with. It's not so much me, but you know, the the group that I'm in is a facilitated group, and we meet four times a year for a whole day, with a therapist facilitating, and that therapist is part of a network of therapists who do this kind of work, um, and so there are people who've got far more experience than I have. I've been doing it for 10 years. There are people out there who've been doing it for 20, 30 years, who understand this stuff deeply. And the other people in the group with me, there's just so much wisdom, amongst the people that I work with as participants. And I just, but what, that was the thing that kind of got me feeling like I need to start getting involved in this conversation, was listening to the accounts of the male detransitioners, because you'll be more up to speed with this than I am, but my sense is that for a long time there weren't really any visible male detransitioners, and then one or two people, started speaking out. And it sort of feels like just in the last few months, there's been almost a flood or an avalanche of people. And listening to their stories, it's that thing that you were talking about earlier on, Mark, where you were saying that when you detransitioned, that you had this outpouring of love and affection, and people who were able to support you and give you some context for what you've gone through. And that's something that I feel maybe the male detransitioners are lacking to some extent,
Yes.
that they're not able to sort of fall into they haven't got a ready-made community that's ready to hold them and to give them some context. And I sort of feel like the men's work community could do that. But I also feel like it's maybe a little bit, because we tend to be older, we tend to be in our mid-40s and up, and maybe we're not so plugged into what's going on amongst younger people. I'm not sure how to kind of make those bridges and make those connections, but I guess my fantasy is, because I've experienced the power of actually men physically being in a space together, which is, it's great to have these kind of conversations online. But I don't think you can, there's something about physically being in a space that is qualitatively different. And I suppose I'd really like to explore, what would it be like to have, to get some guys like me together with some people who've gone through the trans thing, who are in the middle of the trans thing, and share experiences and see where that takes us.
And I think that would be very powerful because it's almost like tribal. I think that in today's world, we're missing out on that tribalness, on that, like you said, groups of men doing things together, being like big brother to one another,
Hmm.
and exploring avenues that have been like lost
Yeah.
in past generations. Like we don't see that now. And women are different. Women still have their little support groups and they talk and they meet, but men don't do that. So I think
Hmm. Hmm.
what we're seeing right now is like the men of today feel like there's nothing for them, so they rather be women.
I
Hmm.
remember back in, I think it was like in the mid 90s, there was a Christian movement that swept over the United States. It was called Promise Keepers.
Oh
And
yeah.
it was led by a guy who was a coach of a football coach of Colorado State, I think it was. And it became a very powerful movement. It kind of got thrown off course over the years, some scandals and things. But I remember, I worked at a Christian network and we did a few of these events, and they drew a huge amount of men, and there was massive reconciliation, especially in the racial area,
Hmm.
with different minorities and the Anglo community and stuff, and it was just this beautiful, like you were talking about, a tribal get together and this coming together and this this spirit of like vulnerability, but love and compassion for each other. And I saw circles of men crying with each other and just
Mm.
and just like really healing the traumas and the wounds of their daddy wounds and the issues that they were dealing with at the time. And I think that there is no space for that at this current time in our society, and what you're doing and what you're hoping to embark on is something that I think is very necessary. And I think that a younger generation could come alongside you, people that have and share the same type of sentiments and desires for men to heal. And I think that it would be a very powerful thing for sure.
And I think it'll be a lot better than what they're doing now, which is giving people medication and letting them feel that they could possibly alter their sex, which we know biology is immutable. You can't change that.
Mm.
So providing them with tools and providing them with that tribal sense of you are valid, you are a man, even though you may not act a certain way. There's many ways of being a man, as there
Mm.
is many
Mm.
ways of being a woman. And I
Yeah.
think that's healthier for our soul, that's healthier for our mental psyche, and that's healthier for society in
Mm.
general.
Mm.
Because we
Mm.
have to look at the bigger picture. We're not an island, and I find that many people in this trans community find themselves to be self-centered, very narcissistic, self stimulating, and we need to realize that what we do affects other people. One hand
Mm.
washes the other. You can't wash one hand by itself. So we
Mm.
need
Mm.
each other. We need to communicate. We need to really dig deep into the real issues and the root of the problem, not just put a little band-aid
And I
against
also
it.
Mm.
think that
Mm.
there's like this misconception that people who do transition get the surgeries and they feel like they can't speak anymore, they can't say anything because they don't want to admit that there's something wrong with them. They don't want to admit that after they did everything, they had the facial feminization or they had the bottom surgery or the breast implants and all that, that they still deal with dysphoria or they still are not seen as women in society.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, I spoke to someone just recently on a Facebook Messenger conversation, and this person had the surgery. I had encouraged them not to get bottom surgery because I just felt that it wouldn't be the answer or what they were looking for.
Mm.
And they're having to get another revision to it.
Mm.
There's problems, as you age with it. And basically, they don't want to come to the understanding and to the acceptance that it's messed up their life and they
Yeah.
don't want to admit it. And I think that that's a deep male issue that males have, that there's so much pride. They don't want to admit that they made a mistake. They don't want to admit
Mhm.
that they did the
Yeah.
wrong thing. And, that's where
Yeah.
it's so important and imperative to have these groups, to have this type of counseling available for men,
Mm.
whether they
Yeah.
transition or not.
So
Yeah.
where could people? I know that you're trying to keep
Anonymous.
anonymous,
Yeah.
but you do have a Twitter account, and I guess people could. And I have the Twitter account on the description area. If people wanted to, I guess, message you there. Is that okay? Or
Yeah, absolutely. Please do. Please send me a message if you're interested in linking up. Um, like I say, I'm very keen to sort of, to have more of these kind of conversations. So yeah, absolutely.
I think it's important to brainstorm, and those people that are watching right now, it doesn't mean that you want to detransition or whatever that means. I think that there's different stages that we walk through in this trans journey. I know for myself, I transitioned in 2003, and I've been back and forth and all over the place trying to understand myself. But I think it's important to healing, however that looks, whether it's
Mm.
a full-on detransition or partial detransition, or just continuing to live your life as you are, but realizing the truth of your biology, trying to make amends with the pain that you are dealing with instead of hurting yourself.
Mm. mm,
further, because a lot of
mm,
people continue to do things that are only going to create more problems in the long run. We age, and aging has already enough difficulty. Imagine aging with all these surgeries and all these
mm,
chemicals in our body. It doesn't look pretty. In the long
mm,
term,
mm.
it will lead us, into a very bad place. So I think it's important for people to stop warring one another, start communicating with one another, start understanding what created the angst in you. Why do you hate being who you are? Those are the questions that we need to ask instead of
Yeah,
just
yeah,
adding all sorts of band-aids and trying to plug in the holes that are being created in your lifeboat.
yeah.
It's like, let's heal. And that's where I'm at. I'm wanting to heal, and I want to help others heal, however that looks.
Hmm.
I think it's important.
Yeah, yeah.
So brainstorming, whether you guys want to leave comments here, or do you want to get a hold of G on his Not in Denial Twitter account? Is there anything else you would like to bring forth, G, that we haven't covered? You had mentioned something about a gentleman that you wanted to talk about, that he was okay in the beginning.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So this is a guy called Nick Duffel. The surname is Duffell, who is somebody in the UK who has done a lot of work with men, and is a really good source. He's written some books, which you can look up, and he's a good source for, if you're interested in this kind of stuff. Um, and there's another guy, a guy called Jerry Hyde, Hyde. He has a fantastic documentary, which is you've got to pay for it. It's like £5 or something like that. But it's well worth it, and it's just basically about what it's like to be in a men's group. Um, I can't remember what it's called exactly, but if you look for Jerry Hyde's website, if you're interested, then that's a really, really good resource, because it just paints a really good picture of what it's like.
If you
Um,
send me the information, I'll post it on the description area for people to
Like to it.
link to it.
Awesome.
So
Yeah. Yeah. We'll
okay,
do. We'll do. And yeah, I just want to say thank you to you guys for inviting me on. It's been a fantastic opportunity, a great conversation. And I think you're doing really, really good work. I can see you've got some fantastic interviews lined up. So keep on doing it, because it's really appreciated.
yeah. And I want to say to everybody right here live that I'm very thankful that I know that it's hard for you, but that you're supporting me by doing this, and you're also raising awareness. And I think it's very therapeutic in general, as hard as it is, because we need to go through pain in order to heal. Healing doesn't just happen miraculously. As a therapist, when people broke their arm or hurt their leg or whatever it is, the rehab is very painful, but you have to get through the rehab to get to the final results. And that
Mm,
goes the
mm.
same for psychological issues. I mean, it's hard to deal with our stuff,
Yeah.
but it's a much needed thing.
Mm,
So,
yeah. Yeah, for sure.
any other questions for G or?
No, no, not really. Just wanted to say thank you so much for offering, your insight and your understanding with regards to the issues that specifically males go through. And I think that's going to help a lot of people to at least start to engage in trying to understand what is going on, especially within a male psyche.
And that's
Yeah.
important. And what you mentioned, G, in the beginning, was that the disconnect, the lack of connection that leads men to like want to run and hide. It's like Houdini,
Mm,
and not that females don't do that. I think a lot of us do that as well, but I think it's more prominent in men. And that's I think why we're seeing what we're seeing today. So we need to like reconnect. We need to start talking. We need to start understanding ourselves a little bit more, and understanding one another.
mm,
It's very
mm,
important.
mm, mm. Yeah,
So
absolutely.
thank you so
Thank
much,
you,
G,
Mark.
for coming on and for sharing your wisdom with us and our audience. All right, guys. So we want to thank you once again. Stay tuned next week. We have another great show aligned, and we're trying to keep them coming. If you know anyone that wants to share their story, please send them our way to transitionradioshow@gmail.com. Remember to hit that notification button, subscribe, share, and like. All right, guys. We love you. But remember to always love yourselves too. See you next week.